My name is Charlotte Raby, and I have been working in education and teaching for more than 25 years. And I've been working primarily in primary education, and particularly at looking at the teaching of English in primary schools for all of that time. Most recently, I have been doing a lot of work for the Department for Education in terms of supporting the COVID, the pandemic support that we're giving to schools, and we've developed lots of resources online for children so that they can continue to learn to read during the pandemic. So that's been a large piece of work that I've been doing. I'm an associate member of the English Hubs Council in the UK, which is part of the Department for Education. And I have been working on phonics and early reading, both with schools in the UK and with the Department for Education for several years now. Very, very delightedly, I have been working as a series editor for HarperCollins for Big Cat Letters and Sounds for several years, and helped to develop the current Big Cat for Letters and Sounds books that are so marvelous. Most recently, I've been developing a early reading program and systematic synthetics program called Little Wandle Letters and Sounds Revised with 2 schools in England. And that program, I've been the early reading expert and phonics advisor for, and I'm now the program developer. Alongside all of this, I work with early careers teachers and teachers who are student teachers in the UK as an English lecturer for Essex and Thames Primary Skit. So I'm very interested also in the research behind reading and in education and what works best. So let's have a look at what we're going to be talking about today, which is early reading. And I'd like to start with this quote from a very important paper by Cunningham and Stanovich called What Reading Does for the Mind. We start off by looking at this quote that talks about the fact that quite often as educators, we can't change our students' abilities. But there is at least one particularly malleable habit that will itself develop abilities: reading. Now, that's what we're going to be looking at today. What happens when children learn to read and that transformation? But Cunningham and Stanovich go on to say something even more important, which is about our most vulnerable young people. We should provide all children, regardless of their achievement levels, with as many reading experiences as possible. Indeed, this becomes doubly imperative for those children whose verbal abilities are most in need of bolstering. For it is the very act of reading that can build these capabilities. So today we are going to look at how reading changes our young people's lives and why reading is so important. And when I think about reading, I think about what happens here when 2 children share a book together, the joy that is sparked by sharing a book, the community that we have when we read together, and really, really importantly, the place that reading has for all of us to find ourselves in and to see the world in as well. When we teach children to read, we really do transform their lives. We transform the architecture of their brains. We transform how they can see and how they can communicate. And when we teach children to read, we spark joy in them because they get to find themselves in the books they read, and they get to find out about the world in the books that they read. We connect them both to themselves and to the world. So our key messages today are that we should have high expectations for all of our children, that we should expect that all our children can and will learn to read, that we should think really carefully about our most vulnerable children, those children in perhaps the lowest 20% of the children in your classes and cohorts, and think really carefully about what they need so that they get the support as and when they need it. We need to be thinking about teaching phonics as the primary approach to teaching reading. And when we do that, we need to ensure consistency and fidelity to that process so that our children can make rapid progress. Because the sooner our children can read, the sooner they can read to learn. We're going to talk about the importance of teaching reading and applying that knowledge in books that are fully decodable, so the children can read them without any effort, matched to the children's secure phonic knowledge in reading words. And actually surrounding all of that, we're going to talk about the crucial element of reading to children and making your school a reading school so that your children don't just learn to read their phonics books, but they also learn to love reading because we give them that message, because we read to them and we instill a love of reading of all the wonderful children's picture books that there are out in the world that really connect to our children and reflect their lives. So in the UK, our present government and Ofsted are very, very clear that it is the right of every child to learn to read. It is so important that we have to take this on very, very seriously. And in our inspection framework, Ofsted say, every school is determined that every pupil will learn to read regardless of their background, needs or ability. And that all pupils, including the weakest readers, will make sufficient progress to meet or exceed age-related expectations. We believe that every child can learn to read. The science of reading shows that every child can learn to read, regardless of their starting points. What we have to put in place is the right structure and organisation and teaching to ensure that every child gets that apportionment, they get what they need so that they can learn to read. And for some children that does take longer, but we still have the ambition that by the time our children leave primary school, they will be able to read. It's so crucial. So the first thing that we're going to look at is a view of reading that came very much into the fore through the Rose Review in 2007, and 2006 and 7 actually, in the UK, where we started to interrogate why the way that we were teaching reading perhaps wasn't working as well as it should do. So Goff and Tumner created this model of reading in 1986, and it's used to describe reading in a way that is set aside to previous reading models, which you might know as the Searchlight model, balanced literacy, or the whole language approach. So what is this model and why does it matter? This model makes it very clear that there are two really key aspects to the teaching of reading. In order to be a reader, I need to have both of these things absolutely sorted. They need to be fluent. So what have we got? We've got word recognition processes across here. Now, the word recognition processes is, can I read the words off the page? Do I have the alphabetic knowledge to lift the words off the page? And then down here are the language comprehension processes. Do I have the words? Do I have the knowledge of sentence? Do I have the knowledge of language in the world to be able to understand what I read? So this simple view helps us think about what are the key aspects for our children when they're learning to read. Now, the interesting thing is that all of us have been in all of these quartiles at some point in our lives. So let's think about a child who has learned to read, but has poor language comprehension processes. So you might have a child in your class right now who can read, but doesn't understand what they read. And in which case, for lots of reasons, it could be that they're not a native English speaker. It could be that they are ASC, they've got autistic spectrum condition. There could be something about speech and language. There could be all sorts of things happening there. But I know they can read. My work is with the language comprehension processes. That's what I need to think about for that child to ensure they become a reader. When we all first came to school, we were probably here. We didn't have any word recognition processes yet. We hadn't been taught to read, but we probably had quite good language from our home, from talking and from communicating in the world. Now, these children come to school, lots of chat, and they just need to learn to read. And so that's where the phonics comes in. That's what we're going to do. We're going to teach these children to learn to read so that they hop over from poor word recognition processes through teaching over to good language processes and good word recognition. That's the ideal. That's where we want all our children to be able to be. Now, some children come to school and they've got poor word recognition processes. They've not learned to read, and they've got limited language. Their language comprehension processes are not very good. It may be that they've come from a background where they haven't had much talk at home. It may be that they have got a language disorder, or they might have language delay. There's lots of different things that could be here. But we know that these are our most vulnerable children. And these children don't just need to learn how to read, they also need all the language that surrounds reading. So when we look at the simple view of reading, it is quite diagnostic. It helps us think about what the children need. And that's going to be important because that's what we need to put our energy into. But no matter how good you are at chatting, and no matter how much you know about the world and language, if you can't lift the words off the page, you aren't going to be able to read. And so that's what this did. It made us very, very clear for the teachers in the UK exactly what they needed to be doing in the teaching of reading in schools. So a slightly more complex model of early reading or reading is the Scarborough reading rope, which came about in 2001 by McCurdle, Scarborough and Katz. And their research looked at what we already had, the simple view of reading, and pulled it apart a bit. And what this is really important about is that it's telling us about how we get to the point where we become a fluent reader. So you can see at the end here where it says reading, both strands of the rope have come together and they are completely entwined. And that's where we want to get. We want to get to a fluent, accurate reader who can create an accurate mental model of what they're reading as they read it, and that they are flexible enough to be able to change that model if they get some new information whilst they're reading. Now that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? What's really important to look at with this model is the fact that all the strands of the rope have been separated. And that's really important because when we are beginner readers, we have got all of these strands are separated. So let's look at word reading. In the word reading strands, we've got letter sound knowledge, our alphabetic code, accurate word decoding, I can read the words, I'm reading them correctly, automaticity in decoding, I can read the words, there is no effort in it, I am reading fluently because the word has gone into something called the orthographic store. So this tells us that we need to be able to recognize the sound, the graphemes in the word written down, the sounds written down. I need to be able to read them accurately and without any effort. And as I do that, as those twines become closer and closer, I end up with accurate word reading with very little effort. Now, the other part of the reading rope is the understanding. Do I understand the word as I read it? Do I understand the sentences the word is in? Because the word does change meanings as depending on its context. Am I able to make inferences about what I'm reading in a very basic way and sometimes in a deeper way? Am I able to monitor my comprehension? Am I able to think about what I'm reading and change my mind if some new information comes about to tell me that what I first thought was true has now been altered in some way? And what knowledge do I have of the text structure so it's easy for me to access the book? Is it a fairy tale? Is it a non-fiction text? Is this sci-fi? Is this a horror? All of that's going to help me understand the story or the text as I read it. What's really important to note with the Scarborough reading rope is that it takes time for this to come together. And just like we saw with the simple view of reading, some children might have strengths or weaknesses in different parts of the rope. But what we can be sure of is if we don't attend to all the strands, the rope is going to be weakened, and that automaticity and ability to create an accurate mental model as you read is going to be weakened, because the child isn't going to have the ability to do that. There's going to be a loose thread in that rope. So both of these models really help us understand what we need to do as teachers when we're teaching reading. So you can't do it all at once. It's very, very clear that it is too difficult for any child to go from learning some sounds to reading those words to just off you go, read any book. Here you go, have some Shakespeare. Here you go, have some Hamlet. Here you go, read whatever. That's an absolutely bonkers idea. Instead, we need to think of reading as a gradual process where the skill is practiced over time, rather like when you first learnt to do something like riding a bike. So I want you to be clear that reading is a complex, orchestrated process. There is no way that I would put my precious young child straight on a BMX and send them off onto a stunt course. That would be really, really bad behavior on my part as a parent. Instead, I teach that child to read with stabilizers. I teach them to have their bike with stabilizers. I give them lots of support. I teach them how to do it bit by bit. And I give them the support just as they need it. Maybe it's that little push up the hill. Maybe it's helping them with their balance. Maybe we take the stabilizers off, but now we're on a flat road. And I'm very incrementally help them become confident and really know exactly what they need to be able to take the next step into fluency and automaticity in riding the bike. And it's the same way with reading. We need to be really, really careful about how we support our young learners as they learn to read. The process of reading is going to require our intimate support and our thoughtful guidance. We are going to need to teach reading, and we are going to need to practice until it is absolutely automatic. And at which point you can ride with your hands off and you can do freestyling down the hills and all sorts, but we need to get all the steps before that, before we set them off. So when we learn to read, and we do that really carefully, and we do it with joy, and we help our children build the alphabetic code, we are going to ensure at the same time that we build that love of reading. So whilst we're teaching children to learn to read, we also read to children, and we ensure that they are taking home and experiencing loads and loads of beautiful quality children's picture books, so that the will and the skill come together so that those children become readers for life, because it's the two strands that are really, really important here. So let's think about the foundations for phonics. What happens before your children come to school? Perhaps they are in preschool. What should good preschool provision include for children to ensure that they are ready to read when they come to school? Well, in a good preschool provision, we would hope to see lots of phonemic awareness. So with a phonemic awareness game, we might be learning that mouse has got the sound at the beginning of it. We might be learning that a toad or a frog, depending on how you see it, that those sounds start words. We will also be growing phonemic awareness through oral blending games. So with our little children, we might say, can you touch your h, e, d? Can you touch your h, e, d? Can you touch your h, e, d? Yes! Can you touch your h, e, d head? So oral blending games, helping children hear the sounds in the words. The other things that really help children become readers are lots of exposure to nursery rhymes and action rhymes, where Children are learning about words and hearing the sounds in words and hearing lovely rhythms in language, and they're also hearing rhyming as well. Spending time with the children, sharing books, reading to them and with the children, and lots of quality book talk is really brilliant in preparing children in terms of listening skills, vocabulary development and language development. And all of that intimate chat that we do with the children, that's back and forth, dialogic talk, is what we want to spend our time on in nursery and preschool provision, because that is the stuff that is going to build the language comprehension processes that we need to be strong in order to be able to read. So, how do we teach reading with phonics? Well, really, phonics is a very simple thing. It is just making the connections between the sounds of our spoken words and the letters that are used to write them down. So the English language is a complex alphabetic code, but nonetheless, it is still a code, and we are learning about the sounds of the English language, of which there are 44, and we are learning the ways that it can be written down. Now, the English language has 144 ways of writing those sounds down, which means that we need to start simply and build up. Nope. Sorry, there we go. There we go. Right, so how do we do that? When we first start teaching reading, we start by building a code. And this code, we start with the consonants and the short vowel sounds. So we call that phase 2 in letters and sounds. And you can see that on the chart here. So we start in reception with phase 2 graphemes, and they are built up like this. So first of all, we teach children about the sound that the grapheme makes. So that's the phoneme. And we do it through showing them objects in a game called What's in the Box. So I'm going to pretend you are my reception class and you are going to play along. All right, you ready? Okay, children, I've got something in my box and it begins with It's a mouse. Say it with me. Mouse. That's right. One more time. Mouse. Look at that lovely mouse. Oh, hang on. What's this? I can see the mouse. It's behind my grapheme. Watch this. Mouse. 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 Copy me. Mouse. Mouse. Can you see the grapheme? Mouse. Wait a second. That's the grapheme. This says Copy me. Brilliant. What does this say? What did we say here? We said mouse. When you see this side, I want you to say mouse. And when you see this side, I want you to say Are you ready? That's right, mouse. That's right. So what we're doing is we're making a connection between the object that makes the sound and the grapheme. So this is called a mnemonic. You can see the little ears of the mouse are helping making the little lumps of the M here, the And that link is going to make a little link in the child's brain between mouse, beginning with and And eventually we don't need the mouse to help us anymore, and we can just read the grapheme Now, this is really important because in order to be able to read, I need to be able to recognize really quickly. Because when I can read without too much effort, then I can move on and start blending. What you can see here in the chart is our grapheme chart that's been created with those little pictures at the top. Can you see little mouse sitting there? So that when the children learn mouse, they can connect it to the large card, they can connect it to the grapheme, and we've even got a little card that we use with the children too. So all of these things match up, making things easier for our children. So we've taught them how to recognize the grapheme and how to say the sound. The next step is putting it together so the children can read the words. We do this through a thing called teacher-led blending. The teacher models exactly what we do when we learn to read. They put out the cards with the graphemes the children know really well, and then they model reading the word. And it's like they're having a light bulb moment. They're like, wow. And then they get the child to copy them. I'm going to show you Matt, who's one of our teachers from Little Wandle, and he is teaching the children how to read a word.
Let's have a look at these graphemes and check to see if you can remember them.
Good. Good. Oh. Ah.
Great reading. Now we're going to blend some phonemes to make a word. Watch me. Ah. Man. Ah. Man. 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 Let's read it. Let's read it again. Great blending.
Lovely, Matt. So what Matt is doing is ensuring that every child is learning to read with him. And by putting out the cards, pointing to each grapheme and saying its sound, k, a, p, and then blending underneath and saying the word, cap, becoming more fluent each time he does it, k, a, p, cap, until he has his light bulb moment, cap. He's modeling exactly how the children will learn to blend. Now, if it's a word the children haven't seen before or don't know what it is, then we would make sure that they understood what the word meant, because reading the word in itself isn't enough. We know that we need to activate the word meaning when we're reading it. So putting those whole things together, we are moving our children from being beginner blenders over time to being able to read the word on the word cards. So this is our first level of support. And then we take away these stabilizers. The next thing we do is we practice reading in the word cards. We point, we don't help the children, and they practice. Over time, we're aiming for the children to become more and more fluent. So we're aiming for this word to be read, blending in their head, dig. And over time, the children will have read it enough times that that word will have gone into their long-term memory, into that special place called the orthographic store, and they will be able to retrieve it without effort. Dig, just like you can right now. Dig. Okay. So what's brilliant about learning to read is that at the same time, you are learning to spell. So spelling and reading are reversible processes. We blend to read, k, a, p, cap, and we segment to spell. So if I want to spell a word, I say it, cap. And then I say the sounds in the word, k, a, p. So I've got 3 sounds. And then I write them down. app. And what's the word? Cap. So those two processes go hand in hand, and a really good phonics program will ensure that your children learn to read, cap, and learn to spell, k, ap, and they can write it down. And it's the two things benefit each other, and the two things strengthen each other. So what you should be looking for if you're thinking about having a phonics scheme in your school, or you're thinking about teaching phonics, is that you've got a really clear progression. You need to learn each new bit of the alphabetic code and secure it. So phase 2 is what we teach in autumn 1 and 2 in the first year of schooling. You can see it's the pink stuff here in the phase 2 and 3 grapheme chart. And those are the graphemes that we read and spell with in reception to start off with. When we've secured that knowledge, we move on to phase 3, which are these lovely images here, and we'll have a look at them in a minute. Once we've got that secure, we can extend that knowledge by doing what's called phase 4. And phase 4 is when we have longer words with adjacent consonants. And I'm just going to see if I can show you one, like this one here, smear, where I've got the trigraph here, ear, and before that I've got s and m. And so these are called adjacent consonants. So we're building the knowledge gradually, and that's really important because we don't want to overwhelm our children. In the second year of teaching phonics, we look at this much more complex code. You can see it's called the Grow the Code chart. It looks exactly the same along the top, but we've got lots more graphemes written down. And those are all the different ways that we can write our different 44 sounds. And this is what the children need to master in order to become fully fluent readers, which is the whole aim of what we're doing. So phase 3 builds on phase 2. You can see there it is at the bottom of our chart. And instead of having the mnemonic, the picture and the grapheme together, we use a catchphrase. So in this case, we've got our lovely picture of our lemur, and our lemur's tail is out in the rain, poor lemur. So it says here, tail in the rain. And on the other side, we can see the grapheme, A. So if I was teaching this to the children, I would be doing it in much the same way as we did before. Today, children, we're learning our new grapheme and phoneme, and it is A. Can you say it? A. Amazing. Well, let's have a look at our picture. Here is lemur. Oh dear, poor lemur. His tail is in the rain. Tail in the rain. Say it after me. Tail in the rain. Tail in the rain. Wait a second. Here is our new grapheme. 2 letters, 1 sound. A. Let's read it. A. If we see this side, we can say tail in the rain. And if we see this side, we can say A. So we can play a game just like we did before, practicing and looking back to our memorable picture and catchphrase that helps us remember that this grapheme says A. Now, because we've taught the children to blend and they are brilliant blenders, we don't need to do the teacher-led blending anymore. Now the children can practice reading with their new grapheme. So I will point and you can read. So you are going to say, that's right, wait. Let's have a look at this one. Rain. Now, over time, we're going to take away our stabilizers and show the word without the dots and the dashes. So the dash underneath this word is telling me I've got a digraph, 2 letters making 1 sound. And this way around, I can't see it. So the children need to be able to recognize that digraph, and we're aiming for them to be able to read it rain. And when they can read it rain without any effort, we know that that word has gone into their orthographic store. We've secured that word in their orthographic store, and it means it's going to be effortless for the children to be able to read that when they get to their books. So with phonics, we build our simple code, the phase 2 and 3 graphemes. We teach tricky words alongside so that they are coming alongside it. So a tricky word has got a grapheme in it that hasn't been taught yet. And then once they've secured that, we grow the code. We take that simple knowledge, that schema, and we build on it in the next year, ensuring that all the children are being challenged, but all of them are being supported just enough to be successful. So, taking into account this model of Sweller's about cognitive load, we know that there are 2 really important things for children as they grow their phonic knowledge. The first thing is that they build that secure schema. So that is that grapheme phoneme correspondence, and that they've got, if they need, this image to help them. We build that secure schema over time. We use that schema to build on when we're learning new knowledge. So that's the idea of something in the long-term memory that we're connecting to. The next thing that we know is really, really important is that we need to practice things until they are permanent. And that means we need to do lots and lots of retrieval practice, going back to the stuff that we already have learned, bringing it up and looking at it again and practicing it until we know that the graphemes are really secure and that the words are in the orthographic store. And it's through that repeated practice, whilst we're learning new things and whilst we're practicing reading, that we are really creating secure knowledge for our children so that they are going to be successful when they read their books. Now, what's really important for our beginner readers and our beginner phonics children is that they've got consistency, that you are always referring back to the same images, that you are all using the same language and you're all using the same routines. Because actually for children, we need them to be concentrating on what we want them to think about, in which this case is reading, rather than, oh my goodness, I've got to learn a new activity. That's what all my energy is for. So routines really do end up with success for children. So routines are our route to success. And if we've got really clear routines and everyone's using the same language, every child will learn to read in the same way. And that makes things so much easier for them. So what does this all look like in practice? We want our children to be able to practice all of that lovely secure phonic knowledge they've been practicing in the lessons in books. And we want those books to be exactly at the child's level, so that when I first start reading, and I'm a real beginner blender, that the first book I read only has the graphemes that I know in it, so that when I'm reading it, I am really, really successful and I can feel really good as I read. And as I get more confident and I start to read new books that are a higher level, I'm still feeling successful because these are always at my secure phonic knowledge. Right at the end, when I'm very, very confident and I'm reading these books, I'm still using my phonics to read every word, but now I'm starting to think about my fluency and my comprehension because I've become such a confident reader. And it's really important that we get the right books for our children when they're learning to read, because if we give books to children that are not decodable or have graphemes in them that the children don't know yet, this is what it looks like for them. So I'm a reception child and I've been working really, really hard. And can you see I can read Sapin MD, GOG, you can see all the graphemes along the top there. Those are the ones I know. And I'm really, really proud of myself because I can read those words in class. I can read dog and I can read cat and I can read hat and rub and all sorts of words. And I am really, really proud because I'm a little blender. But you give me this book. How do you think I feel when I'm reading this book? How do you feel as a reception child reading this book? So what I'd like you to do is have a go at reading it and then tell me how you feel about yourself as a reader. and pop it in the chat. Valerie is puzzled. I tell you what, Valerie, I'm more than puzzled. I'm a little bit overwhelmed and I feel like I want to cry. How else do you feel? Frustrated. There's lots of Farhana and Charlotte are both frustrated. It's made Patricia dizzy. I know what you mean. And when we feel like this, do we feel successful? So the OECD says that a love of reading is the greatest indicator of a child's future academic success. And if this is your first try of reading in a book, do you think you like it? Is it enjoyable? Would you want to do it again? Do you remember I said to you that we need the skill and the will to make a reader? And if we give children books that don't match the children's secure phonic knowledge, we are telling them, here are some sounds that you can read, and here are some words that you can read, and here's a book that you can't. In that way, the two things are not matching. And in that way, we're actually telling a lie to children about what they know and what it's like to read. So we do have to give the children the stabilizers, the support, and that support is the right book matched to the children's secure phonic knowledge. So in my book, I've really not helped my child. There are lots of words in there I can't read because I haven't learned those GPCs yet. I don't know that AI says A. And if I tried to read jars with the knowledge I had, jarus, I'm not going to get it. I might get it if I had a really great vocabulary and I could work it out from the context, but that's called guessing. The problem is your children who are most vulnerable, who are most likely to fail and find it difficult, they are going to find this the hardest. They are the children we need to be thinking about first, and they're the children that we need to put everything in place for so that they do succeed. If your child is not a native English speaker and they're learning to read in English, then their ability to link a word and its approximation to one that they have in their vocabulary is limited, and they are unlikely to be successful. So it's really important that you use a really good assessment to link what the children know to the right books for them. And if your children are not reading yet, then that's okay, because you will give the children wordless books like this one, which is absolutely gorgeous, where there's lots and lots of time for chat and talk and growing that vocabulary knowledge. And what you will be doing is practicing the decoding with them. You'll be doing teacher-led blending until they can blend, and then they are ready to read a book with words at their level. And that's what's really important, is that every child is successful at every point of their journey. So when we teach reading with Little Wandle, which is my program, we ensure that the children read the book several times. I want you to go back to that reading rope and remember that everything has got to come together to give us an accurate mental model of what we're reading as we read it. When I first read this book, if I'm a beginner reader, I am definitely going to stumble on these words because they're probably not words I've come across before. Looper, off, moth. So I might read, look for it. This looper, off, moth is on the bark. Now, do you think I understood what I was reading as I read it? Even I, knowing what that was, found it hard to attend to its meaning. Could read the words, I had the phonic knowledge to read the words, but I wasn't understanding what I was reading. And if I read that book one time, that would be it. And we would not be attending to the children's understanding of the sentence and vocabulary, and we wouldn't be bringing it together so that they could understand what that's all about. So with Little Wandle, we read the book 3 times. In the second read, we turn on our storyteller's voice, or in this case, because we all love David Attenborough in the UK, and it's a non-fiction book, I'm going to turn on my David Attenborough voice. So I will tell the children, when I read this, I'm going to start off with saying, look for it. And I'm going to say it as if it's an instruction. And then for that second sentence about the looper moth, should we all see it? Can you find it? Can you find it? It's quite hard to see. Can you see? It's quite hard to see on the bark. So I am going to be surprised that it's on the bark. I'm going to show surprise on that word bark. All right, so I'll have a go and then you can have a go. Look for it. This looper moth is on the bark. Your turn. And that gives the children an insight into how a real reader reads, and they can start to think about creating prosody. Prosody is the music of the sentence. And when we can read with prosody, it means that we understand what we're reading and we're bringing it to life with our voice through intonation, pitch, and expression. On the next read, I am going to think about my book, which I've now hidden from myself, ironically, and I'm going to think about all the things that are in this book. All of the things in this book, all the animals are hidden. There's a special word for animals and objects that hide themselves. It's called camouflage, children. And when we look at this book, I think it would be really interesting to think about these animals and whether or not they're hiding because they're predators and they're hiding because they want to jump out and get something, or because they're prey and they're hiding because they don't want to be seen. So with our comprehension, we can talk about the book, which we know makes a big difference. We can talk about the knowledge behind the book. We can link it to the children's experiences. And when we do that, we are helping the children create an accurate mental model of what they're reading as they read it through the 3 sessions. I'm going to show you a film of some of this in action from Little Wandle. The teacher that we're going to see is Jess. She's teaching a reception class in Birmingham in the UK, and they are reading the book for a second time, and she's teaching them to read it with expression, with prosody. She's telling them why they should read it this particular way.
It says it is a big mess. Now I'm looking at this picture and my goodness, there is an awful lot of mess on the beach, isn't there? So they really mean it's a big mess. So when I go into the word big, my voice, I'm going to add a bit more expression to that word to show how much of a mess it is, like this, big. Okay, and the whole sentence will sound like this. It is a big mess. And that's showing you that it's an awful lot of rubbish on the beach. Listen again. It is a big mess. Should we try it together? It is a big mess. Fantastic. Try it on your own.
It is a big mess.
Very good.
So do we think those children feel good about their reading? We can see that they are all masters of their text, that they are all enjoying their reading, and that they've got control over what they're reading, and they feel really powerful, like they're real readers. It's very, very exciting for them. And that's one of the really important things we know from working with hundreds and hundreds of schools in the UK is, well, actually thousands, is that doing this way of reading really is impactful, not just in the terms of the children are reading and they're reading better, they are reading with more enjoyment, they are reading with more fluency, and that they see themselves as readers. So if you're going to teach reading with your fully decodable books, and these are the lovely Big Cat ones that we have for Little Wandle, and there are the Big Cat for Letters and Sounds books as well. These books come with really great inside cover notes that tell you exactly how to teach. You really do want to be using your resources so that you are practicing the graphemes at the beginning of the book. So we're ensuring we're setting our children up for success before they read by reading the graphemes and the words in some of the words in the book beforehand, particularly those tricky words. And we're going to ensure that we're looking at vocabulary as well. So we might well be looking at that word there, toad, and in which case we might have a picture for the children, like this lovely toad, to help the children understand what that word means, so that they're secure in their reading of the words and their knowledge of the words before they read the book. So I've said this several times this afternoon already. A love of reading is the biggest indicator of future academic success for our children. If we teach our children to learn to read quickly with phonics, and we allow them to access books that really match their secure phonic knowledge and make them feel successful as readers, if we read to our children in class and encourage our parents to do the same, we will be wrapping our children with the love of reading. They will be successful in learning to read, they will see a purpose in reading, and they will become readers for life. And that in itself cannot, I do cannot underestimate how impactful that is for the children that you're teaching. If you teach every child to learn to read, then you have given them an absolute gift, and that is the gift of reading, and it is a transformational thing. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to leave you here with the keep in touch with us details of HarperCollins, and I do believe we've got a few minutes for questions if you've got them.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. That was absolutely brilliant. I think everyone really enjoyed that. So before we get started on the questions, I would like to say thank you very much again to Charlotte for taking us through the presentation today. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we'll be sending everyone who has attended today the webinar recording and the attendance certificate for you to refer back to. If we do not get round to answering every question, or you'd like to see some sample copies, please do contact us at collins.international@harpercollins.uk. So on to the questions. So number one, we've had a question that says, does phonics work for all children, or do certain age groups like children with dyslexia find that they struggle with it?
So certainly all the research is very clear that phonics harms no one. That's what I'm going to start off with. And phonics benefits everyone. So some children, for example, children who may have dyslexia, benefit from phonics because it gives them a clear structure in which to be able to break down words, and then the practice that they need. Quite often children who may have reading, well, they're not reading disabilities, but disadvantages when it comes to learn to read, they need additional practice. And certainly I've been an SEND teacher for a long time, and it's always been the additional practice that has got those children reading in the end. Some children take longer, but in fact, we can really help those children by putting in additional support for them right from the start. So any child who is struggling at the beginning to retain GPC or learning to blend, they need more practice. And in our schools, we've tended to see where the teaching is strong and that this is done from the outset, that we don't have issues with dyslexia hardly at all, except for some very rare children who are really, who have got extreme cases of dyslexia, and then actually they do get there. They do get there in exactly the same way as all the other children. I would say you want to start teaching phonics in school, and I wouldn't be doing that in nursery. So once you're in formal education, that is the time to start, not before.
Great, thank you.
Okay, there were some comments in the chat that might be worth addressing further back through. So just one of them was around teaching of letter names and phonics, like how and when to do that, and I guess bottoming out that confusion around that. Yes. There's letter names and the sounds for letters as well, the phonemes.
Yes, absolutely. So when I'm teaching that this says there's a really important reason why I'm going with that and not the letter name. If I want to read the word man, I need to know that this says because in man it does say That is how I'm going to be able to read the word man. M-A-N will never make the word man. The letter names are useful once the children have learnt the phoneme grapheme correspondence, that this grapheme makes a pure sound, it's phoneme, and this is what I need to use to read. Once I've learnt all of these, then I can learn the letter names, and they are useful for spelling, particularly later on when I'm thinking about which graphemes do I need when I'm making the A sound. Is it AI? Is it AY? Is it A split E? Is it EIGH? Etc. etc. But when we're teaching reading, it is confusing to have the capital letters at the same time. We wait until we've taught all of these guys first.
Thank you, Charlotte. There was another comment that I saw, and I'm sorry, because it's the chat so long, it's dropped back, so I can't see it now. But it was relating to the fact that you have written grapheme, so letters that make different sounds, and how to know which sound they make, and how to. I think the person who wrote the comment sort of talked about sealing, and how do you know the pronunciation for that kind of a word where you've got the C at the beginning.
Right, do you know what? I'm going to whiz back and show you our code. So can you see here, this is our Grow the Code chart. This is the chart that we work with children. And we can see here that I've got the grapheme, the sound here, and you can see all the different ways that it can be made. In fact, there are many. And let's have a look at the sound S. And there is C saying S. So we teach those as we teach the complex code, and that's the whole point of having a phonics program, is that we are strategic and systematic. If you're just teaching this makes this sound in words, and you're coming across a word and there it is, if you don't have the schema to put it in, the children are going to always be guessing. But we can teach very strategically where graphemes come in words and what they're likely to say through teaching this advanced code. So this is the code we do with children in their second year of learning to read. And you can see in there that we do look at some quite rare graphemes as well. But the children do, by the end of their second year of learning to read, they do master it all.
Brilliant, thank you. So I saw another one in the chat as well. Someone said, can this approach be adapted to be used with EFL teams? Or do you have any tips?
So it's really, I would say, if you're teaching anybody, whatever their age, to read, you want to be used phonics because it's going to be the quickest way to read. What you would be doing is doing it at a greater speed. So you would be bossing that first code really quickly. If we look at that, that's something that you would be able to get into people's minds quite quickly, and then you would be building that more complex code a little bit later on. But yeah, it's actually exactly what you'd be doing. And obviously in the UK, we do that with older children as well who haven't learned to read or have come newly to the UK and are learning English, and we would use exactly the same system for them.
Absolutely. I think that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately. But I'll just say thank you to Charlotte again for a brilliant presentation, and thank you to Lizzie as well for joining us for the Q&A. And thanks everyone for joining today. We'll be sending the recording to you in the next few days.
Lovely, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye everyone. Bye.